Fake.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake.
Australia is going to the polls. The election is upon us. And regardless of the outcome, there is only one certainty. Whether it's a major party who loses, or those on the political fringes, maybe even one of those loose independents, one of them, I promise you, will blame their demise, their failure, on fake news. But what is it? Where has it come from? And how can you protect yourself from becoming its next victim? Well, facts are the enemies of fake news. And I hunted out Russell Skelton. He's the head of Fact Check here in Melbourne, an organisation of independent journalists and investigators who spend their hours verifying or blowing up the claims being made by our politicians.
So Russell, you're the head of Fact Check, and one thing that's fascinating me is right in your pocket, and that's this evolution of fake news as a pop culture term. Where did it come from? Where did it start?
Well, I think nobody seems to quite know where it actually started or who was the first to use it. It probably started with fact check operations, calling out incorrect and false information. And of course, the whole fact check movement has taken off amazingly since Donald Trump came to office, or even before he came to office. And so you've seen worldwide a proliferation of fact check publishers and units, and attached to the media, attached to universities like we are, and it's become this whole industry has become more and more bigger and more intense, and opening Trump to scrutiny. Now, Trump's response to being pinged, and I'd point out that the Washington Post fact checker Glenn Kessler has now reached his 5,000th misleading claim that Trump has made.
Wow.
Without challenge from the Trump people.
So 5,000 times that Donald Trump has been found to be
misleading or wrong that's just one fact check organisation in America.
Wow.
And that's the Washington Post. Anyway, Trump's way of responding to all these the bad news, the bad reports, him being pinged all the time for making inaccurate and untrue statements, has been to then turn around this term and use it against the people who are the fact checkers, and accuse them of peddling fake news. So he attacks the New York Times, he attacks CNN, he attacks PolitiFact, he attacks all these various groups, using a term which was probably coined by the fact checkers themselves against them, and it's proved to be very effective.
It is an effective strategy, isn't it? And I mean, the way that fake news has evolved, it's really social media centric. It works well with social media. The hashtag fake news is almost everywhere.
And everybody understands it instantly. I mean, it's got that sort of resonance. So as fact checkers, we're moving away from using the term at all. We ignore it, and we like to talk about misleading or incorrect or wrong information. We try to avoid this term
fake news.
Fake news.
Are you moving away from that because it's almost become a little bit comedic in the way that it's being used?
Well, it's become a cliche. And look, and the realities of this huge, I mean, what we've got here is industrial scale false information coming down the social media pipes. It's like a giant fire hose. So when you're talking about, if we want to stick with the phrase fake news, you're talking about the bot factories in Russia, you're talking about all these blogs in America that are pumping out false information about a whole range of subjects all the time. Some of it's malign, some of it's pushed out by the Russians to try and destabilise democracies and discredit elections in France and or manipulate elections in the US, and the referendum they had in Britain about Brexit. some of it is young kids in the Ukraine just trying to make some money because they put out sensational claims, they get lots of hits, they can generate advertising. So they
call them entrepreneurs.
There's a whole range of what we would call fake news coming out.
Yeah.
And it's important to distinguish us as fact checkers. Our traditional remit has always been to look at the claims of politicians, lobby groups, people trying to shape the direction of public policy in Australia. We haven't actually looked at the whole issue of people who deliberately and maliciously go out anonymously to spread false, misleading and malign information. That requires almost an industry response from people like Google, Twitter, Facebook, to actually have the algorithms in place to pick the false sites up, the false information up, and to take action.
I suppose in a more pop culture sense, we've been seeing it in glossy magazines for a long time. Almost at a, unless you're the target of the glossy magazine in a, not an innocent way, but in a more of a celebrity targeting way. How dangerous now that fake news is spreading across a whole lot of things, including elections and destabilising governments, how dangerous do you think social media is in terms of societies being manipulated? Well,
clearly on some points, a lot of these people are able to manipulate opinion, through the social media channels. You just look at Cambridge Analytica, and they came up with that phrase, crooked Hillary, which Trump used in his campaign. They went and tested it amongst certain groups. They worked out that this phrase would resonate. It's complete misnomer, of course. There's no evidence that she's broken the law about anything. And they waged and built a whole campaign around it. And if you look at the stuff that comes over the internet, the doctored photos, the savage headlines, the gross exaggerations of claims and things. So that has become almost a domestic problem within the US, that sort of information. I suppose the flip side of it is really, if you're going to deal with this, we need to educate people who are using social media. It's impossible because you can take one claim. So the French election was really interesting. There was a whole dump of false information 3 days before the election, and a bunch of media outlets and researchers in France analysed this. It spread to millions of people within a matter of minutes. So there's the fact checkers come along and we take 3 days to look at something, and yet we find it, it's wrong, and we put out our verdict. Well, a whole lot of people have been influenced presumably by the spreading of and reading this stuff before it's corrected. My view is that there's a range of things that can be done. You can go to Google, you can go to Twitter, you can go to Facebook, YouTube, all the rest of them say you need to be responsible for the fake news that's you're publishing, and there should be laws and regulations around you to make sure that you do your job properly. Now, they've got the same problem, but they can build algorithms. They do have teams with really sophisticated research tools that can spot this stuff and clean it up and get rid of it. And recently Facebook deregistered some 700 Facebook pages for being totally bogus.
And they could probably also do a better job in helping spread the corrections, because I presume that's one of your biggest challenges, is that you might be able to detect fake news and highlight it, the misleading claims, but then how do you then reach the audience that's been influenced by it? And maybe that's a role that the platforms should be playing in.
Yeah, well, they are looking at it. Google is the most advanced. The others are pretty slow in the uptake because they don't want to destroy their business model by suddenly deregistering a whole lot of people and kicking them off. But I would say, look, having looked at this problem and been to a number of seminars and various conferences around it, I think the best answer is this next generation of kids coming through need to be able to read the URL. If it says it's ABC News Australia and URL says it's coming out of the Ukraine, well, you know this is not a real site.
Yep.
You can do your own searches. Who's saying this?
Yep.
You know, who is the journalist? Is it somebody a well-known byline from the New York Times or from the Age or from the Australian newspaper? Yep, we know this guy's or this woman is Ridgy Didge. They report regularly. Okay, so therefore you can give some credence to it. There are a series of things you can do. You can even do reverse image tests. So if you get, I mean, there was a case recently in Europe where they had a picture of what appeared to be Muslim women on a beach in Turkey, coming on land in their hordes, and was actually a still shot from a movie being shot.
Wow.
We're using Muslim women with, the various coverings as film extras, and yet they took this image, refashioned it, said, being swamped by Muslims, here they are coming over shore, whatever, and it was a completely false image. Now, with reverse image searching, as you know, you can put that image in, have a look, and you can see where else it's been used, see its history, and say, that's not a true image.
Yeah, that's the trick that we learnt from the show Catfish, right?
Yeah.
When they were hunting the catfish. So what about this trend at the moment, particularly in Australian politics, where politicians on all sides of politics, as soon as they get under any sort of heat, their get out of jail clause or get out of the heat clause is fake news. Mm. That's how it's being used, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. But I think, look, I've got a bit of faith in the public. I reckon when somebody starts screaming fake news, everybody takes that with a grain of salt. But, I mean, the good thing about Australia is this, and why we don't have the problem that America and Europe and even parts of Asia have, and that is that we're a small market. So therefore, to try and monetize bad information, it's not really worth it here. It's much better to go to America with 300 million people.
Yep.
And get people to...
the ad revenue's better.
Yeah, the ad revenue's better. I think that the media outlets is fairly limited and reasonably well known.
Yeah.
And there's another factor which is really important in this. In the UK, in Canada and Australia, this sort of fake news has less resonance because there's a national broadcaster. So we have a national broadcaster which people can go to check their information to see whether it's correct. If there's some major claim about some outrageous scandal in politics and it's not running on the national broadcaster, or it's only running on some obscure website somewhere, you can people do discount it. So I guess that's in all this madness. That's the positive side of it for us, but we don't know whether that's going to last forever or even last until the next election. And I think the next election would be very interesting to watch.
I suppose that's the danger. I mean, everyone, there's two sides of politics. One side wants to look at reducing the resources of something like the ABC, and I'm not an ABC watcher, but there is a reason why it's there, well beyond what many people think. They think it's just for silly comedy shows for comedians they don't know of, and shows from the UK, but their news service is probably the most vital bit.
Yes, and particularly in remote and regional areas of Australia where there are no news services. It's the reach there of the ABC is considerable, and the dependence of all sides of politics on the ABC is huge. But I really do believe the national broadcaster is a leavener of some of the madness that goes on, and plays a very important role here.
Okay. Do you feel as though you're a pioneer out in the Wild West, and that setups like Fact Check will become more important and bigger in the future? And you're one of the first here in Australia. There aren't too many fact checks in Australia, are there?
No, there were 3, and now there's 2. The Conversation have a fact checker who does an excellent job. There's us, and other media organisations have dabbled in and out of it, but not embraced it. But the interesting thing is, I went 5 years ago to the first fact check conference in the world, and there were 35 of us in a room from all around the globe. This year I went to the Global Fact 5 conference, same conference, well over 150.
Okay.
So in that space of time, it's grown. And some of these fact-check organisations were struggling financially, but now they're getting a lot of donations. There's a lot of public interest, a lot of public belief in fact-check journalism. We don't like to think it is a form of journalism that relies on data and scrutiny and expert opinion. It's not just what the politicians tell us.
Well, that's a lesson for all journalists. As a former journalist, all journalism should rely on those pillars.
Yeah. Well, I think you see what's happened here is really interesting. Is the what we refer to these days as the legacy media, the Age, the Sydney Morning Herald. I guess even you can put the Australian in there. A lot of other newspapers. As Google and Facebook and everybody have ripped the advertising revenues away from these newspapers, they've reduced staff. The number of expert reporters that are reporting on expert areas is reduced.
Yeah, just the years of experience.
Yeah, the years of experience have gone, and the numbers are not there. Whereas I was chief of staff of the Age when we had a newsroom of over 100 reporters. There's probably 20 or 30 there now. So, and the papers are much smaller, been shrunk right down, so they present less information. So the whole world has changed, and so therefore social media's sort of exploded and become the pipes for people receiving their information, and the mobile phone in particular. Everything we do is fashioned to come through that mobile phone. So therefore, out of that has risen the need for a different type of journalism, one that's more data-based, empirically based.
Yeah. And I suppose the challenge, as you said, the solution to the challenge is educating the next generations, the generations that have been born with the internet and social media, to check their sources, find the ones they trust, and don't believe everything you read online. Where I grew up and you were taught to believe everything you read in the newspaper.
Yes, but see, I think you made a choice about which newspaper you wanted to read, which newspaper you thought was reliable.
Yeah.
And people make the example of that when the printing press was first developed, that everybody was out there, a bit like on social media now, putting out fake news and really vicious out there opinions which couldn't be verified in those days. We're talking hundreds of years ago. And then over time, people have learnt, I know, I'll follow this particular paper because I know it's reliable and what it prints turns out to be true. And I have faith in the intellectual capacity of its reporting staff. So I think eventually people will make those sort of choices and decisions, but you can help them get there because this is an immensely technical world, and we're up against this incredible technology that can spread bad information very quickly.
Is it at crisis point, finally? This is the last question for you.
Well, I think there's a debate about this, and I think most people would say yes, it is. That the crisis has really impacted very, very heavily in the US and a lot of other societies. But the counter side to that argument is that the Poynter Institute did some research recently on trust in the media, and all the major news outlets like the New York Times, CNN, are all still really trusted by people, and people are going to them. So, and in fact, go to them more than ever, which is sort of encouraging in a way that people, the gross manipulation we fear that's taking place, maybe people are a lot more sceptical and a lot more savvy in how they, what they believe and what they don't believe when they see it.
I suppose that if you're not sure about something, check if it's on multiple trusted sources and you'll get your answer.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just common sense in a way. You just don't... The thing what happens is, of course, with Facebook, and this has been really documented, is that we have groups of friends, and you and I are friends. I trust whatever you post.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily read it. I think, gee, that's an interesting headline. Yeah, that's probably right. I'd like my friends to know about that, and you push like.
I think they call that the filter bubble.
Yeah, and then it turns out not to be. You know, we're all responding to something which wasn't right. So there's an onus on all of us, I guess, at the end of the day, to actually, if you're going to refer something on to your friends, look at it carefully, examine it, just put the filter over it, and see if it is ridgy-didge, and if it is, push it on.
Well, it's really interesting because we're entering into a world where anyone can be a broadcaster.
Exactly.
But not everyone has the structures and the standards to be a responsible one.
Well, that's where the whole problem is sort of based, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
But I think we will make our decisions. I will make my decisions about my friends when they send me stuff to like. I make decisions all the time on Twitter as to who I think's writing intelligent, thoughtful posts, and those who are just...
They're few and far between on Twitter at the
crazy.
moment, in my feed.
Oh, look, yeah, well, it might be in your feed, but I've sort of worked out, look, if you're covering federal politics in a way, okay, it's who gets it right?
Yeah.
You know, when they're making predictions about stability or votes or how things are going to go, who gets it right? Who's consistently right? And from that, you can make your own judgment about the worth of various people to follow, I think.
Awesome.
And
Russell?
encourage everybody to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Check it out. Don't believe everything you read on the internet unless it's on factcheck.com.au. Is that right?
That's right, absolutely right.
Check it out. The link will be below. Russell, thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks
to
for the
chat with
time.
you. And keep up the good fight
We will.
against the fake newsers.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.